Hey, it's June 8th. Just wanted y'all to know that this past week I took a break from pot to get my tolerance down. I like to do that every once in a while. And I took one capsule today, which is a third of a gram, and I chose the sativa, and I am so fucking high right now. My tolerance is back down to almost square one, so that's a good thing to do every once in a while. Hey everyone, my name is Eric Gay, and I am a child torture survivor. Now, what is that? Um, well, I'm a child abuse survivor, but it goes way further than that. I was tortured at a therapeutic boarding school for nearly 3 years when I was a child, in probably some of the most unimaginable ways. The name of this former institution was called the Family Foundation School. They got shut down or closed down voluntarily in 2008, or maybe it was 2014, due to all these child abuse allegations, and it is probably the most wild 12-step cult that has ever existed. And it was also based on the four absolutes, which are honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. And here's my story. How did I end up at the Family Foundation School? Well, when I was 16 years old, I was more concerned about having fun and goofing off than I was going to school and having responsibilities. I was very immature. I liked to smoke pot all the time and experimented with drugs, and I had gotten suspended at school, or from school, and my mom gave me a drug test, which I failed them all the time, but this time cocaine showed up in the drug test, and it really caught me off guard because it was several days before the drug test that I did the cocaine, and I never even really got high off of cocaine, just did a little bit at a time growing up, and every so often, you know how it is, one weekend we'd do some ecstasy, another weekend we'd do something else, and whatnot, and just good old fun stuff. I never had a terrible experience doing drugs growing up. Just had the best time of my life, actually. Some of the best times of my life with my friends growing up. I mean, it was awesome. I had a pretty good childhood, and but after I failed this drug test that my mom had requested for me to have done, I got sent to rehab. So I went to this inpatient rehab in New Jersey, where I grew up, and got into a fight with some kid and walked out the next day. It was kind of having the last name Gay wasn't as cool as it is now. Back then, back in 2001. So I stood up for myself, but I got picked on at rehab, the first one and the second one, and well, after I walked out of the first one, my mom got me into an outpatient program temporarily, because she told me not to go hang out with my friends, and 16-year-old kids. I had a girlfriend and relationship problems, and I walked out the door. She called the cops on me and ended up getting me arrested or whatever, and I said something along the lines of I'd rather kill myself than go to rehab, and so they held me for a couple days and ended up court mandating me to this rehab in Pennsylvania. And so I had trouble there too, of course, having the last name Gay. I had to deal with bullies, and one of them in particular, this like heroin addict, and so I gave it back to him just as hard as he was giving it to me, and he almost beat the crap out of me. Luckily he didn't, because he was a lot bigger than me, and we were allowed to smoke cigarettes at this rehab, and I caught some other guy going through my drawer, and he stole 2 packs of cigarettes from me. So that night I put lotion all over his pillow, underneath his pillow, and he didn't find out till he got into bed. But anyway, that along with me yelling at my mom over not giving me a letter or something like that. I was a troublemaker. I was disrespectful, but boy, I did not deserve to go to the family school. On day like 27 or out of 28, right before I'm ready to go home, these 2 guys show up with shackles, and they say, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but you're coming with us." And I said, "Okay, I'll go the easy way." And we took a couple-hour drive from Pennsylvania to New York. They told me, it's just another program. They didn't tell me. They said it was similar to the one I was just at, and so that's when they took me to the family school. So I arrived at the family school, and the first thing that happened to me was they did this intake where, they strip you down, search you, gotta take a shower and all that stuff, and I was another student and a staff there, and on the way out of the locker room they said, "By the way, this is an 18-month minimum program," and that just, sent chills through my body. I was a what was I, a sophomore? I was a sophomore in high school, and 16 years old, and all of a sudden I'm in a lockdown situation, and they paired junior students, new students, with senior students. Nobody could ever go around by themselves unless they were a super senior student, and I'm not even sure when that started, if that was closer to when I left the program there. But so the senior student brought me all over. I even had to go into the bathroom with him, which shocked me. His name was Yannick Ledard, and he was my junior sponsor from the Bahamas, and so but I had to go everywhere with him, and it was it was an interesting place and layout. It was about 250 students divided into 8 families or groups. I was in family 2, so there was about 35 or so students, maybe 25 boys and around 10 girls per family, and there was a handful of staff members that worked in each family. There were 2 staff members in charge of each family. Mine was family 2, and so Mike and Roxy Lasico were in charge of me. But I had a different sponsor. I had Joe Petrielli was my first sponsor, and this school was based on the 12-step program and the 4 absolutes. So honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love are the 4 absolutes, in addition to the 12-step program. So we were basically required to work the 12 steps and incorporate it into every part of your life. It's not like a 12 steps and you're done thing. You don't have to work them in order necessarily. It's just basically fucking common decency and common sense about how you're supposed to behave. But then there's other things like giving it away to giving up everything to a higher power and whatnot. There's a lot of God stuff in there, and so I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to forget the 12-step program. But anyway, this place was a cult, and they forced us to pray together before and after each meal. We'd have to hold hands and pray. We'd have to go to a different religious service every day, Monday through Friday. There'd be a Protestant service one day, a Jewish service, a Catholic service another day, and whatnot. And so we started the day off every morning going to church, and it didn't matter if you were Jewish or Christian or whatever, you still had to openly pray those prayers. After going to church every morning, we'd go down for breakfast and then go off to school. And so during school, it would be until like 5 o'clock. They really nailed school into you, but that's only if you were behaving and following the program. If you didn't follow the program, they took you out of school to do work sanctions and work crews and all that stuff. And there was a lot of brainwashing going on, which I'll get into. And so after the school day would be over, we would have to we would generally have dinner in the family areas, and there'd be table topics at every meal, which I'll get into, where students would have to stand up individually in front of a room full of their peers and staff members, and then they would get grilled over and over again about anything they possibly did wrong, what they could be improving, and if you really made a mistake, they'd make you take your inventory, which you'd have to require or figure out, one of the 7 deadly sins which caused you to misbehave, and then you'd have to commit to changing. And I never really understood most of it. I constantly got into trouble all the time and had no idea what I even did half the time. And so, but then after dinner, we'd be required to do our homework or whatnot, and then we'd have to go to sometimes there would be like exercise in the evenings maybe, but a lot of the time I think it was just dinner, and then which included family time, I guess, and it was really just dinner, church. You go back up to the chapel to pray, and then you go back to the dorms. And the dorms, each family, the boys had a single wide trailer. I don't know what the standard length of a single wide trailer is, but there was 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and about 25 boys in the trailer. You could only take a 4-minute shower. There were shower timers. You only had a certain amount of time, like 30 minutes from once you got into the dorm to lights out. And after lights out, that was it. It was dark, pitch black. You couldn't talk. You couldn't do anything. And then you wake up in the morning. You had 30 minutes to go. Try going to the bathroom and around all those people, and getting all your hygienic stuff taken care of. I mean, it's considering how overcrowded it was, it could have been a lot less hygienic, but I mean, the towels we had to reuse, and they'd hang up next to each other, and so it was definitely it was definitely not the greatest situation. And so so when I first arrived there, I really had some good intentions on cutting back on the drugs, if not all of them, especially all the experimenting I was doing. I was going overboard with a lot of that stuff, and so when I first got to rehab, I thought drugs were cool, and they had everyone in the gymnasium get together and write a list of all the drugs they had done, and how often they had done them, and how they did them, and whatnot. And we all just war storied together for like an hour and made our lists a mile long, and they said, "Don't worry, only your sponsor at the rehab is going to see it." And so, but a week later, my mom walked out of the rehab holding that list, crying of all the drugs I was doing. And so they basically, these 12-step goofball jerks, I mean, at this rehab in Pennsylvania, told my mom I was a garbage head. And so the other main reason I ended up at this family school. So when I first got to the family school, I did have good intentions on cutting back on drugs, getting my life organized. It was time to stop goofing off, and I was going to work this 12-step program. I really didn't know much about it, but I read all the 12-step stuff and was trying to do the program. But so the first thing they had you do when you get to the school was they make you fill out a dishonesty list of every terrible thing you've ever done, and they make you read it to your parents. And so I had done the list, read it to, my parents are divorced, so I can't remember if it was my dad and stepmom or my mom and her boyfriend at the time, but I read it to one of them, and then I got back to the table in my family afterwards, and I was told that's not thorough enough. I had to make it way more thorough, and so that's how they get you there. They force you to make these lists of all the terrible things you do and tell your parents everything. And so how did they force you to do that? Well, through punishments. And so I'm having trouble recalling the exact order of when the punishments started. I think the first time I ended up in the corner was I got called up to the table for cheating on a Spanish test. And it's not what you think, because I did a vocabulary test. I was in this Spanish class, and I was never really good at Spanish at the beginning. And this teacher, her name was Monica. It was a 20-word vocabulary test, and I thought I nailed it. So I wrote 100%, A+, and a smiley face on the top. Well, I guess I misspelled one of the words, and I only got a 97. So she came to Family 2 and brought me up for being cocky and cheating, and cheating on a test. I couldn't believe it. And not only did I get thrown in the corner that time, but I got put on a sanction where I could not make eye contact with girls because I was flirtatious. And it was pretty common there. I wasn't the only one, but I wasn't allowed to make eye contact with the opposite sex for over a year. And I remember when I first got there, I made a comment to another senior student at the time. His name was Matt Koch, and I said, "Man, she's cute," talking about this girl, and he said, "Those are our sisters. You cannot talk about them like that." And it kind of shocked me. I mean, luckily I didn't get in trouble because I was such a new student, so it was a warning, but he ended up running away on a field trip in Washington, D.C. later on and never coming back. And so, but that just goes to show students were required to hold other students accountable, otherwise they would get in trouble. And if you were being negative with other students and shady and whatnot, they would call those negative contracts. So they always kept the new students away from each other. I really don't even know why I got in trouble half the time, and so every time they'd stand me up, sometimes they'd stand me up at the table for, you know, every day for, 10, 20 minutes at each meal, and grill me about working the 12 steps, and they always, at first when I first got to the school, Mike Lasico referred to me as Mr. Liberal, and so because I had an opinion, I was a normal person, and I was questioning them, and that wasn't really allowed, and so one of the punishments was the corner sanction, and so when you weren't being forced to do manual labor, you'd have to go to the corner, and you'd either have to sit in the corner or stand in the corner, and I was in the corner on and off the whole time I was there pretty much, but I was in the corner for nearly 2 years total if you add up all my corner time, and so it's pretty unbelievable. And when I first arrived there, Joe Petrielli was my sponsor. I remember one time he had me sit in the corner and write like a 10,000, then it turned into a 20,000, a 30,000 word essay on why the 12-step program is important. And I just kept writing down a bunch of gibberish in the corner, and I think he was actually pissed off that I was actually able to write it. And so he was a really obnoxious person. He would walk through the hallways and yell, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, and just bump kids out of the way. And he was a former heroin addict and deviant, and with hepatitis. Same thing with Mike Lasico, I think. I'm pretty sure Joe had hepatitis too. I know Mike Lasico did, but they were in cahoots. They were both Sicilian, and Mike Lasico always referred to himself as Mussolini. He's a fascist dictator, is what he always said, and that's what we had to deal with. And so, work sanctions. They took me out of school for over a year to carry buckets of rocks all day. We had to carry 5-gallon buckets of rocks from one pile, maybe down the road a quarter mile, and dump it into another pile, back and forth all day long. We had to fill up the buckets as much as we could physically carry, and they had, probably about a half a dozen students at a time on these crews, and one staff member walking them back and forth. We had to build a walkway one time. Another punishment that I'm going to mention that is almost impossible to believe is I was required to do something called the stare sanction, which Mike Lasico created for me. They always looked for new ways to punish students, and I was being given alternative food, which was bad enough. Alternative food is when you get a bowl of cream of wheat, one packet of cream of wheat in the morning. You get dry tuna on an English muffin at lunch with a piece of fruit, and peanut butter on an English muffin at dinner. And that's all you were given while you were forced to carry rocks all day. And before I got to eat, while in between carrying rocks, they'd have me do the stare sanction. And so Mike Lasico made me fill up a backpack full of books, and I had to carry a stack of books in my hands, and I had to walk up 4 sets of stairs. So of 1, 2, and that would be the second floor, then 2 more sets of stairs, and that would be the third floor, and I'd have to walk back up and down for 45 minutes before each meal. And I remember one time Mike Lasico called me down during the middle of the stare sanction during breakfast, and he told me, he said, "You're one of the few students who've actually gotten worse since you arrived at the family school." And he acknowledged that. And then he told me, he walked me through how I could get better with the 12-step program. You admit you're powerless and this and that, and then he said, okay, and get back on the steps. And so then I ended up back on the steps. And I was on the stare sanction for over 3 months total, on and off. And I remember just losing massive amounts of weight. another sanction that I had different speaking sanctions, and so some were you had to say yes, thank you to everything. Um, that was a common one, but I had to say a speaking sanction to be acknowledged. And Mike Lasico made this one for me. I had to say, "Hi, my name is Eric, and I need a first step." And I had to say that every time I wanted to talk to someone, and that's what I had to say to be acknowledged. And I had to say that for about 6 months. And so, if you didn't go in there, which none of the students, maybe 1% of the students had actually hit rock bottom and were junkies or drug addicts. Most of them were kids who experimented with drugs. A lot of them didn't even do that. And so, they would make you hit rock bottom, and so I guess he wanted me to admit I was powerless over drugs and alcohol and whatnot, and I guess I just never felt that way. Another speaking sanction I had to do after Joe Petrielli didn't work out after a while, they gave me Kevin Glassett, and this guy, all these former staff members, or most of them, had actually gone to the family school when they were younger, and that's how they recovered. And so Kevin Glassett was another one, and he was a former alcoholic who lived under a bridge at one point, but he was really fucking smart. He was really smart, and intellectually smart at least, and whatnot. But he became my senior sponsor at one point, and he changed my speaking sanction. My speaking sanction then became, "Hi, my name is Eric, and I have no humility, and the humble man knows the truth." And I had to say that every time I wanted to be acknowledged. And this again happened for like another 6 months. And so talk about just some of the most weird, embarrassing things they can do to really bring you down, and make you feel hopeless and powerless, I guess. They would do stuff like I had to trot in place, do cleaning crews. I had to clean the pig pens, and sometimes every family had a pig pen, and so sometimes it's just your responsibility to clean the pig pens. Otherwise, it's because you got in trouble, and sometimes you'd have to clean all of them if you got in trouble, and they were fucking disgusting and whatnot. But we got little piglets, and we're forced to raise them all year, and then staff would take them and put them in their freezer. And I remember Joe Petrielli just bragging one time about how much bacon he had in his freezer, and or pork or something, and okay, so going back to the family school, I need to tell you a story about some previous students there, because the family school ruined people's lives and broke up families. There was a student there, a former student that I went there with. His name was Jim Murray, and he arrived at the school when he was when he was like 13, and he was in Paul Gear's family for a long time, but that didn't work out, and he ended up in family 2 with me for about a year before he turned 18, and he was a really nice kid. He wasn't a drug addict or anything, and really, I don't even know why Mike and Roxy Lasico were so against him. They didn't think he was working the program, but like I said, he was so smart, he had so much potential, and I'll never forget the day he turned 18, they stood him up at the table that morning and told him, "We're bringing you to the YMCA in Binghamton, and your family's going to disown you." And he he started crying. He broke down and started crying. He didn't want to leave. He didn't know anything else, and that was, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but I mean, that just goes to show that's how manipulated and brainwashed the families were. If you did not work the 12-step program, they would disown you. And I had to carry that around with me for a long time after I left there. I couldn't be honest with my family. Another former student I need to tell you about is Alex Ward, and he was somewhat of a more senior student when I first arrived there, and same thing, they abused him. He was in the corner for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months before he finally ran away for good, and he snuck out of the dorms at night, and I'll never forget the next morning, Mike Lisico had the nerve to tell everyone in Family 2 that he was going to take Alex out of the corner that day. And we never heard from Alex again either. Nicholas Kinney was another one. He ran away. There's just so many people that left when they turned 18 or ran away, and I don't know if their families ever took them back or anything. But I actually ran away on a work sanction with 2 other students the last time I was able to run away. I'd run away 3 times, and they had taken away my shoelaces, and I had made shoelaces out of a prayer necklace that they gave me, and then I was only allowed to wear flip-flops, and I don't know, somehow I ended up on this work sanction, and I must have been wearing shoes, because I ran away when I was with 2 other students. And real quick, somehow I ended up with this book called A Long Walk, and it was about this guy who ended up in a Siberian work camp or a work prison back during the World War II time era, and he was forced to lay bricks all day and nearly freeze to death, and he escaped, made it a 2,000-mile journey, or I don't know how many thousands of miles, but he ended up going south and trekking through the Gobi Desert and nearly dying. And this was the book that gave me hope when I was there. And so I decided to take a long walk, and I ran away with these 2 other kids from a work sanction. We were forced to carry buckets of rocks all day, and we were building this prayer path or something like that, prayer walkway, and we were able to run away from this work sanction, and where the school was about 10 miles or so from the nearest civilization, and we ended up breaking into this cabin to get food and water, but I mean we only got some water, and we went to town and split up. I ran away with Dave Lee and Eric Langner, and we split up when we made it to Hancock. Dave and I were trying to hitchhike a ride into New York City, and we couldn't, and we ended up walking back through these backyards, and we saw Eric Langner inside the back of this house in this refrigerator, and it was this real estate building that we ended up breaking into and hanging out for most of the night, and then right before the sun came up, we took some blankets and slept on a golf course and dang near froze to death the next morning. Tried to hike towards New York City, and we were making our way that way when a police officer commandeered some guy's pickup truck, and he nabbed us, and we were too tired to run at that point anyway, so we got a ride back to the family school, or got taken back to the family school, and as we're being pulled in, one of the dorms is burnt to the ground, and another student, Will Owens, had actually reached his breaking point and burned down the family 3 dorm, and luckily they caught him and didn't blame it on us. Um, but Will Owens, he was a senior student in family 2 when I first arrived, and I'm not sure what happened, but he ended up in family 3. They had him on exile for months and wearing slippers, and that poor bastard, he reached his breaking point too. But anyway, one of the kids that I ran away with admitted to everything, and I ended up getting court mandated back to the family school a second time, and which was it was really devastating because I wanted to leave when I turned 18, and this was a real court mandation from the state of New York, and which stated I had to graduate the program in order to get off of probation and all that stuff. Eric Langner ended up with the best deal out of us. He ended up in a wilderness program, and Dave Lee, he ended up running away again and did some time in jail. I'm not really sure whatever happened to him, but these are just a few people. One kid actually dove off the 3rd story balcony while we were there and killed himself in front of a bunch of people while they were changing classes, a bunch of students. A friend of mine, Matt Bajakian, who was in family 2, told me he saw him hit the ground and blood spurt out of his neck and out of his mouth, and luckily I was on a dish crew at the time and I didn't see any of that, but also since then the New York Times has done an article about the high death rates, the high suicide rates of the former students. That, in addition to the families they've ruined and the stress they've created, I just don't know how this was allowed to happen, and I'm sure it's probably continuing to happen on some level or another. 12-step programs and cults are not the answer. One thing I want to add is you don't go to other alcoholics and drug addicts for help. I mean, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You go to people who have willpower and common sense for strength and advice. The 12-step program is flawed because you're just replacing one addiction with another. You become addicted to the 12 steps and the group and all that shit, and you're just dependent on something else. Well, a wise man once told me, his name is Tom Riffle. I was talking about wanting to quit smoking cigarettes, and he looked at me and he says, "Get some goddamn willpower, you pussy." And that kind of clicked in me. I just after that, I just decided to see how long I could go without a cigarette. And I was amazed at how empowered I felt. The longer I could go, the better I felt. And I was proud of myself. And knowing I have willpower is something that everyone needs to know about. So the former staff members of the family school belonged, or still belong, to this cult, this 12-step cult based on the 4 absolutes. And they had you could just tell they felt and believed that they were better than everyone else who didn't work the 12-step program to the extent that they did. They looked down on everyone who didn't, even just regular people, and but in particular the former students. They made us feel like just dirtbags and garbage and that we were awful people. And it's taken a long time to realize I'm not a dirtbag. I wasn't an awful child. And it's kind of ironic. They're they're the ones that are the dirtbags and the horrible people. Um, the biggest irony is now I use medical marijuana to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's pretty interesting because I got sent there for being a pothead, and now I use medical marijuana to to deal with the anxiety and stress that they've left me with, um, that I have to cope and deal with every day. It's pretty mind-boggling. Um, it's like a living nightmare, an unimaginable living nightmare that really has no end. And so the family foundation school, the former family foundation school, was a cult. And the best evidence I have to support this claim is I actually had to make a commitment to not have sex before marriage in order to graduate the program. And this was this was something every student had to do, especially in family two. I remember Roxy Lasico yelling at a senior student when I first arrived there. Her name was Tara, but she was a little reluctant to make that commitment for some reason. And Roxy Lasico was yelling at her, calling her a slut and a whore, and telling her, that she's a terrible person. And they always brought it back to the fact that they told the students they would end up in jails, institutions, or death, or they'd be dead if they hung out with people and places and things. It was always that same rhetoric that they kept repeating, and that's just how. I mean, they were so aggressive and so mean, and so forceful, trying to brainwash us, and we're kids. I mean, what did they think was going to happen? Just completely unbelievable. So Paul Gear would preach every Monday morning, and do this religious service every Monday morning for probably 30-40 minutes every Monday morning. And I remember one time he preached about being fake and how phony students would always eventually realize that if they were liars at the school, no matter how long it took, they would eventually come to see that they were right. The family school was right, and the 12-step program was the right path, and that the truth and the 12 steps are the only way to salvation, basically. Another time, I remember him preaching about pornography and how those images will stay in your mind forever. Kind of a weird thing to preach about, but that's just they all seemed so sincere, like they really believed what they were preaching, like they really practiced what they were preaching. But Paul Gear was recently arrested for molesting children while I was there, but he was scary. He was in charge of Family 6, I believe, and he was in charge of the chorus. And when I became more of a senior student, I wanted to show that I was trying new things, and so I joined chorus. And I don't have any musical talent, rhythm or anything like that. And I really had no idea what I was doing. When I tried out for chorus, he had me do these vocal scales, which I did really good at. I had to copy the tunes of the piano, and he made me a tenor one, which I didn't even know what that was, but I had no idea how to read music. And about several days into chorus, we're singing along, and he could tell I didn't know what I was doing. And I was actually I was student of the month at the time, and so I was doing better than ever. And he could tell I didn't know what I was doing. I was afraid to ask for help because he was kind of a scary guy. And I remember him flipping out, yelling at me at the top of his lungs, and telling me I didn't know what I was doing and kicking me out of chorus. And I remember I had to get up at family table topics that evening, and I broke down crying because I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to get in trouble. I'd seen senior students who were about to graduate with special privileges get thrown in the corner or on exile, and the next morning I had to get up in front of the table again. I took my inventory. It had something to do with my pride, being afraid to ask for help, and I dodged trouble that time. I got back up into chorus in front of everyone and took my inventory in front of Paul and the rest of the chorus and begged them to let me back in, and he did. And luckily another student, Corey Frank, he taught me all, helped me get through there. He taught me all of my parts and how to read the music, and I ended up making it through chorus. And every year we did this trip. It was a music competition in Washington, D.C. I think it was the North American Music Festival, and we did that. And then I ended up graduating after that in 2004, and they made me do this work study program for a couple of months. It's not like you could say no to them. And so I stayed there for a couple of months after graduation, ended up going to college in Pennsylvania for a semester, and that's when I got taken off of probation. I guess after graduating the family school, my parents were so manipulated and I was so manipulated, I just didn't even bring it up very often, and every so often my mom would bring it up, and I didn't like that. And one time, it was about 10 years ago, 10 years after I left the family school, when I was out to dinner with my mom and my sister and my nieces, and one of my nieces was misbehaving, and my mom cracked a joke about sending her to the family school, and that's when I told her, hey, you do not ever bring that up again. They tortured me. And my sister happened to look it up, and she said they shut down due to allegations of child torture. And I instantly was triggered, and I couldn't believe they had told us over the years. Joe Petrielli in particular, he said, we can do anything to you because your parents signed you over to us, and we can do anything to you. And the cops always brought me back. I told them they were abusing us, and come to find out that they weren't allowed to abuse us after all. That was kind of mind-boggling, and that's when I read about other students having PTSD. And in 2015, I actually took my own money and went and saw a psychologist for a PTSD evaluation, which they made me do these tests and whatnot. And long story short, I have a post-traumatic stress disorder. I guess nightmares are probably one of the biggest things I have to deal with. I end up back there in my nightmares. Anxiety attacks, especially around other people, hyperventilating and shaking and losing my train of thought. I've never kept down a steady job over the years. I've been a medical marijuana caregiver for a long time, starting in 2007, but since it's been legalized, my services are not really needed anymore, and so I'm trying to teach the whole world how to produce their own medicine on a large scale, and I'm doing pretty good. I live with my significant other, my companion Tiffany, and we're going to be building a house together at this property we own. Thank goodness my mom bought me a piece of property in Pagosa Springs. Our neighbor Hector is helping us build it. He built his own house. He's a retired iron worker. He drew us up the design, and little by little we're gonna get it done. It's gonna be at least a 5-year project, maybe 10. So I have a dog named Charlie, as y'all know, a cat named Kevy, and Tiffany has 2 wonderful children, Summer and Amelia. So we're happy. Now that being said, when I first got the PTSD evaluation, I was told that the statute of limitations were over for child abuse. Well, that kind of really stopped me in my tracks. The Child Victims Act came up, and I was really gung-ho, and I had spoken to attorneys on and off, civil attorneys, and they pretty much told me I didn't have a case either way. But then the Child Victims Act came along, and I tried contacting them and had gotten denied, but COVID happened, and I kind of gave up on that. Recently, I just happened to be watching this movie. I think it's Murder in the First with Kevin Bacon and Christian Slater, and the bad guy Gary Oldman, the prison guard, locked up Kevin Bacon. He was an Alcatraz inmate for 3 years in solitary confinement. And during the movie, I don't know if I was just relating to Kevin in that situation, but somebody during the movie said these are crimes against humanity, and that just clicked in my head, and I started looking up crimes against humanity, which include torture, and there's no statute of limitations on crimes against humanity, and that kind of triggered me this last time. I mean, I've been triggered on and off over the years, but that's when I realized I am not just a child abuse survivor. I am a child torture survivor, and the people that did this need to answer for what they've done. I guess the Justice Department is required to investigate child torture. I don't know. Melanie Trimble from the New York City Liberties Union, she told me she wasn't sure if there's a difference between the statute of limitations when it comes to civil and criminal law. This is a complicated issue, so I'm not sure if they'll be willing to pursue it. I've been in contact with Special Agent Chris Smith about this Paul Gear investigation, and he told me that if there's anything, if he can arrest them for child torture, he will, but it could take 5 years, because that's how long this has taken for them to put together this Paul Gear case. I've also filed 2 criminal complaints with the International Criminal Court, and I have the records for those. Also, I've sent stuff to the State Department, and the list continues. And if there is no chance of getting justice, if these people are not going to answer for what they've done, well, then I just want the world to know what they did to me. And that alone will be something. Now, this war on drugs is probably the biggest joke. Growing up, you could get any drug you wanted in high school. First time I smoked opium was in the stairwell of my high school in New Jersey. And you're never going to get rid of the drugs. Here we have marijuana, which is a safer alternative. I promote that to anyone because it can replace so many different drugs out there that people just need to be aware. I consider myself a victim of the war on drugs. I mean, look what they did to me as a child for experimenting with drugs. And you know, this is corporate America. You got private prisons. What do? They have to pass laws to make sure they're filled up. What better than drug laws? And so the policy on drugs needs to change. We have this shit with the president's son now, Hunter Biden. Oh my God. Are you kidding me? Did he hurt anyone? Do I need to remind you guys that alcohol is arguably the most dangerous drug on the planet? And here we go. The policy on drugs needs to change. People need to be educated. And when you lie, like the federal government has, and say there's no such, marijuana has no medicinal value, nobody's going to really take you seriously, especially the war on drugs. And so, also, we have crazy pharmaceutical companies that have just weaseled their way into society, and they're passing off these drugs that have more side effects than for what they're supposed to help with. And so, we really need to reel in the corporations as a society. Here we have really 1% of the world controlling the other 99%. And the problem is the other 99% just don't even realize it. I think more people are becoming aware of this, but what they're trying to do now is divide our country and to seize absolute power through whatever means necessary. And with this upcoming election, we can't let that happen. We need to stand united, stay strong. We need to demand that they legalize marijuana for everyone, and these politicians should be held responsible. Lobbying should not be allowed, and these corporations need to be reeled back in, and that we also need to be prepared. I don't know if everything is in motion for another world conflict, but preppers need to unite. Medical marijuana is going to be the only thing you're going to be able to access if the system collapses. You saw what happened during COVID when the shelves got empty. It's more important now than ever. If you don't need the pot now, you might need it in the future. You might know someone who's going to need it in the future. This is a medical necessity, a medical right, and people need to have access. Here in Colorado, the state has taken advantage of federal prohibition, and people can go to the stores and buy pot, but you're going to spend a lot of money for a bunch of garbage. Tiffany smoked a hash-laced joint from the store the other day with a friend and didn't even get high until she smoked a bowl afterwards. And that's just of my stuff. And anyway, it's time to reel in the establishment. And I wouldn't tell you to vote for Trump or Biden, because either way, I think the 1% is going to win.